Hello everyone. Ooh, I haven't been standing in front at the lecture theatre for ages, for many years, so this is a bit scary, so please bear with me while I introduce today's event. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to friends, colleagues, students, everyone for joining us online as well. I hope you can hear me okay. Is the sound okay? Can you hear me? Okay, that's good. Welcome everyone. So nice to see so many faces here. A lot of them are really familiar. I know who my allies are and where they are at this moment in time. So this Decolonising the University, Learning from Grassroots Organisers, is an event following Black History Month, which Black History Month we feel like is for amplifying Black voice, and this is something that Amy Bullard and I discussed during our planning meeting, that we feel like for Black History Month is amplifying Black voices. And now we're moving into November, and with the thought that we shouldn't only be doing race equality or any equality stuff for specific months or weeks, we continue now to think about the actions that we can take to challenge or dismantle hierarchies in the way we organize. So this event is being live streamed and recorded. The camera will only capture speakers in the front, so we've got the consent from people. We won't be turning the camera around to film you in the audience, so I just want to let you aware of this. And also at an event like this, I think it's quite important to be reflexive and also acknowledge the limitations and constraints. There are many groups, departments that are exploring different ways of decolonizing in their own circle, in their own community, or even what does decolonizing mean? However, due to limited resources in terms of time, capacity, you will find that the format of today's activity, the event, the infrastructure in which we're in, and thanks to Eleanor for pointing that out, we are in a tier theatre, which itself is very hierarchical. And also the invitation of and connections that we have today. We have York Anti-Racist Collective doing the presentation. We also have colleagues from 3 different departments, actually central departments used to as well to talk to us. These are actually done through personal and collective connections. So in many ways, even though we want to make it as collaborative as possible, these are the limitations that we really need to acknowledge. In what ways we can be collaborative in an institution that effectively facilitates ways of doing things that may not be collaborative. So we would have liked to seek more collaborative approach and methods outside and beyond our understanding of the academic ways of knowing as well, and also to challenge the power in an institution and group. So I just want to put it out there. We are aware, and we should be aware of these limitations. This event is also entitled Decolonising, with a capital ING, the University. We recognize that our work in decolonisation is ongoing, a process that requires constant reflection. Many of us, if not all of us, are connected to colonial history in different ways. And colonization is also a lived reality for people around the world, such as in the US, where indigenous people are reclaiming their lands, and in Gaza, where attacks have continued and escalated. Our discussions of decolonizing require us to be critically aware of the power structures on multiple levels, global and institutional, as we think about the present, the history, and how they are entangled in complex ways. Some of these things are already difficult to discuss, and it's even more so when members of our communities are affected by wars, violence, and trauma. We also know that some of these debates can be divisive. Many of us also find it challenging to articulate our emotions and thoughts at this time. It is important for us to acknowledge these complexities and take care of each other. And while we engage with these issues, we do so with critical compassion. And here is a late self-introduction. My name is Kai Cao. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a Taiwanese immigrant in the UK, a feminist who's committed to anti-racism. My grandfather fled war, and until recently, I never had to say that last sentence. And after all that, I am an equality and diversity coordinator at the university. I'm constantly learning and negotiating my principles and commitment in an institution, which I believe many people here are. So we all have our various roles and stories that we might not know of each other, but I hope this very long introduction and welcome will be a demonstration of how we want to make this space, online, in person, to be an open-minded space. We actively listen to each other, and we give each other space and time to reflect and learn. And if any part of this conversation today becomes difficult for some of you, please feel free to step out for a few moments, find yourself some time and space for yourself before you come back in again. Okay. Thank you very much for listening to all that. So, I should have remembered that, shouldn't I? Thank you. That's very generous of you. I don't think that deserves the applause, but I've done my welcome. Our program today is we're going to have forewords, and I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves because I can't possibly justify the way I know them. They have more stories than I may be aware of. But we'll have forewords from students and staff, followed by the presentation from York Anti-Racist Collective. Then we'll have a panel conversation, followed by a discussion that's open to all of you and also people online if you have any questions. There are limitations. We might be able to take questions, but not being able to let you speak back to us, which I apologize. But for that, we have created a Padlet. So you can share your thoughts, share your experience, share your reflection. Okay, so that's open to everyone. I do apologize, we won't have the resource to monitor what's going on this Padlet. So I would urge you, everyone who's now listening in, to be gentle and, like I said, critical compassion in the way that we put forward our ideas and thoughts with some care. And then we will close the event later with a reflection and response. Okay. So now I would like to welcome Amy and Kate from York Anti-Racist Collective to start a presentation about the way they organize to start this. Oh, no, sorry. Like I said, I'm nervous and I get ahead of myself. Can I invite our student representatives, Sarika, to come and talk about why this event and decolonising is important? I do apologise, we forgot the forewords. There you go. Thank you.
So my name is Sarika Patel, and I'm one of the BAME network officers, and I'm currently representing the student body, and I'm honoured to be a part of this event. As an English literature student, the practice of decolonising is meaningful to me, as whilst I can appreciate that the department has its roots in European, American and African literature, the decolonising practice regarding how we discuss literature and how we apply theories to them needs to be conversed. In the space of the seminar, I no longer want to witness students discussing topics without understanding the context of the colonised space, without fully understanding the realities of the colonised individual. And I don't want to see people of colour represented tokenistically. There are people like me in those same classrooms experiencing an immense sense of frustration. The university needs to seek multiple perspectives in which political practices can take place. The university needs to serve as a space of solidarity for knowledge exchange of all kinds. The decolonising practice goes beyond decolonising the disciplinary canons and research methodologies. It needs to infiltrate classrooms and the campus, and I hope this event will showcase that and prove that decolonising is relevant. We've highlighted that decolonising is a verb. It is something that we must be doing continuously, an ongoing process, and as students, as the younger generation, we have a responsibility to ensure that the process remains ongoing. This is even more pressing in a time where colonisation is still a lived reality. For effective decolonisation to take place, the student body needs to recognise that colonisation is not a piece of history. Otherwise, the university will not be a space where we can feel comfortable, away from our homes and our families. For some students, like me, we see our parents being forced to live with repercussions of colonisation. So within the institution of the university, us students want to feel that the curriculum, the research, academic practices and the power of the institution do not reflect the effects of colonisation. It has fallen into the hands of students to question the power structures of the university, challenge them in a diplomatic way, and to think about both past and the present in order to assess and spur the process of decolonising. Students must be aware of how the institution is structured in a way that protects itself, and how signs of colonialism, empire and racism are still alive in our campuses. We must challenge the notion of the Western University as a privileged site of knowledge when my peers are still experiencing modern colonisation. A Eurocentric system of knowledge which remains oblivious to the diversity of the world will only lead to ignorance. We can see multiple groups have been formed to spur positive change and to decolonise the university on multiple levels. Yet, from a student perspective, we do not hear enough about the progress or the processes, nor do many students know these groups exist. It is sad and it is frustrating, and it has got to a point where I wish we had the ability to let these groups have an overwhelming presence, so that the talks about decolonising can properly come into action, and the student body can fully be behind it. I hope this event can start this process in the collective space of the university in an effective and collaborative manner. Some might see this as naive, but we must stay positive. And we need to see that we need to just recognise the process, and we need to see the action. And this action will only be successful if we teach the student body to not be neutral. There is no beating around the bush here. Decolonising does not have a synonym, and there are no alternatives. The students need to realise that they cannot disconnect themselves from this process. And it is not a case of taking an activist role or being too political. It is simply a fight for equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those incredible, powerful and very inspirational words. My name is Jess. I am a member of the Inclusive Education team at the university, so I'm part of the university, part of the centre. Since 2020, I've been involved with the university's Decolonising and Diversifying the Curriculum project, alongside quite a few colleagues, I'm going to say friends, colleagues who are here today. And it's really good that we've come together in this space to talk about this. So at the heart of the work that we've been doing in this project is working collaboratively with staff and student colleagues. Thinking about this, I really wanted to share with you a little bit about the project, the university's project and the institutional work taking place, and also a few thoughts and reflections that I hope feel relevant to today's themes, and I hope feel relevant to some of what's already been raised and discussed. So how did I become involved in this work? I joined the university in 2020. My timing was impeccable. It was just as the lockdown started, so there were lots of challenges there. But my remit was to work with a group of student interns, paid student interns, to create resources and guidance on inclusive approaches to learning, teaching and assessment. As soon as I started working with the student interns, I very quickly came to understand that for quite a few of them, decolonising and diversifying the curriculum was an absolute priority. I also worked closely with student union officers who were leading student campaigns in this area, and they were really keen for the university, echoing what we've heard today, they were really keen for the university to begin to do something about it, alongside the global campaigns that were taking place. This intersected with the events in 2020 around the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement really calling for change. And I suppose, on a personal note, I felt it was really important for me to use my role and the team that I was within to support the students I was working with and student union colleagues to prioritise this in our work. And through the Race Equality Coordination Group that was set up, the university's project was established. It brought together staff and student colleagues, and I'm going to say activists. It was lots of student activism going on. It brought us together into a working group. I've always believed, and it's always been kind of at the heart of what I do, that the processes involved in this work are as important as the outcomes. We put at the heart of this work I suppose, co-construction with students and with staff, with student union representatives and with other students involved in activism and grassroots campaigns. We formed a working group. We have a former chair, Kai and Carisha, a current chair of our working group. We had students who are co-chairs as well. We employed more student interns to work on this project, and the student interns organised some staff and student discussion events that took place. This was all during 2021. As a result of that, we co-constructed a set of principles and shared understandings and a toolkit of resources for staff to use. Our statement of approach. It was a really, for me, it's a document. I think it's an ongoing process. But I think it captures quite a lot of powerful principles and shared understandings about how this work should, or how our student and staff representatives on the working group wanted the work to progress. So since then, we have done quite a lot of different activities. We worked with some students at Maastricht University, student activists. They weren't in paid student roles. Part of the work that we did encouraged them to kind of approach their institution about putting paid roles in place. So we worked with them and co-created a conference presentation together. We've had faculty practice sharing events where we've shared practice that's taking place. We had a symposium in June. We've supported departments, for example, through the Learning and Teaching Fund that we coordinate to pay for work that's taking place. And at the heart of that always has that part of the condition is that student partners are paid and they're in paid roles as part of that work. We have worked to help, I suppose, make visible, amplify work that's taking place through collecting case studies. We've created a Google group so that communication can kind of really begin to develop in these spaces. It feels as if we've done work, but it doesn't finish. It's an ongoing process, and the more that we can work collaboratively and collectively together, the better. Throughout this, there's been a continual process of thinking critically and reflectively about what myself and the team that I work with and the working group, how we work collaboratively, particularly given by its very nature. The foundations of this work are in grassroots activism, and that is a challenge. That's something we have to think about critically all the time. I have to think about my own perspective, my own privilege, my own role, and I have to think critically, I have to think reflectively about that. While doing this work, it's been really important to think about the power dynamics involved, a continual process of thinking about that. In our statement of approach, we say, I'm going to quote here, "It is important to acknowledge and challenge the power dynamics in knowledge production, including the implicit and explicit hierarchies." That's at the heart of our statement of approach. We also go on to say the process of decolonising and diversifying the curriculum is one of co-construction with both staff and students working as active partners. That needs attending to, that takes work, that takes challenge, and it's something that I hope we've embedded, but we can always do better, we can always do more. I think that we really need to think about how to the power dynamics, how we disrupt and how we dismantle them through a process of co-construction. One of the first students I worked with said to me, it's not about being invited to the table as a student activist or a student intern, it's about dismantling the table and creating a new space, a new way of coming together. I really hope we can continue to do that. I hope that I can continue in my role to support, facilitate, use any leverage I have to make sure this work has the impact we want it to have. So thank you for inviting me to your space and this space today. I'm really looking forward to listening and learning. I think that's really important. I always aim to make sure I'm listening and learning. We have a Google group, which I think Kai may say something about in terms of sharing that as a link. And please do get in touch. Really happy for you to reach out to me on my own email address, but also through the Google group. And I look forward to working collaboratively together. Thank you.
Thank you. The group that Jess just mentioned is the Decolonising and Diversifying the Curriculum group, isn't it? So at the moment, that Google group brings together people who are working in this field in many different ways, but it's a good way of communicating with each other. Now, let me try again. Thank you very much, Sarika and Jess, for your very powerful statement to start with. Now, we welcome Amy and Kate from York Anti-Racist Collective to give us their presentation.
Hi everybody, can you hear all right? Do I need to move that up a bit? Am I allowed? Okay. Hi, we are Amy and Kate from York Anti-Racist Collective. Thank you for having us. Today we will be covering a bit about who we are, what is York. Amy's going to take us on a bit of a centering practice so that we can ground in the moment and shed a bit of perspective on the moment that we're in. I'm going to share a bit of a 3-step framework on decolonisation that's hopefully helpful for your context of the university. We're going to talk a bit about coloniser and decoloniser characteristics and also how York takes its approach to decolonising as a active, perpetual activity. And Amy's going to finish on talking about the realities of this work. I feel like you need to say something.
Shall I say something?
Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm Amy. My pronouns are she and her, so both Kate and I are York coordinators with volunteering. Where you have to go really close. It feels quite like, I'm going to keep moving like this. Yeah, I also I'm a consultant at our business, the Teapot Collective, so I do a lot of inclusion work with organisations using a trauma-informed approach. I'm a yoga teacher, so that's why we're going to do a centering practice, coming from a re-indigenising the practice. I also work with Baobab Foundation, which is a large funder that's just kind of started in the last 3 years to decolonise how the third sector receive money, wealth distribution, that's what I was wanting to say. And then I'm also a gender studies graduate from this uni 5 years ago, and Kai used to be my lecturer. I'll pass to Kate.
Thanks. And thank you, Kai, for inviting us and being like a long-term supporter of our work and collaborator. So I am a co-coordinator of York with Amy. I also work at Joseph Rowntree Foundation on a team called Emerging Futures, and we're looking at innovative ways to solve the poly crisis. We know that the way that we're working right now isn't going to get us to the future that we want to see. So we're partnering with organisations like New Constellations, who I'm seconded with, to use imagination infrastructure to start working in a completely different way and imagine that future that we want to see and start implementing change to get there. And I'm happy to talk about that to other people if you want to come and chat afterwards. I'm also part of the York Camarados movement, where we set up public living rooms, and the premise of that is that we're all human, let's be more human, sit down, have a cup of tea and a biscuit with anybody and everybody. And I also did a piece of work with the National Society of Art and Design. They're a national trade union, as an anti-racist art education action researcher and content maker. Oof, that's a long title. And that was in decolonising curriculums for education across all levels. So I'll talk a bit about that later. I just wanted to say a bit about what York is and how we came about as well. We are a really small grassroots organisation, and Amy's really shy talking about this, but Amy founded York during the resurgence of Black Lives Matter when George Floyd was tragically murdered in 2020. And there was this distinct lack of space for people of colour in York to come together, to grieve, to vent in safe spaces. So despite the pandemic, Amy created online spaces, and we eventually moved offline, meeting in the museum gardens, going for picnics, and that has slowly grown through a really slow, nurturing, decolonised way forwards. And now what we offer is we do decolonised art workshops, so we focus on creative tools and creative workshopping, community connection, and sort of care, compassion as tools for healing from racialised issues. So we're really proud of the work that we do. We've done it mostly on volunteer hours. We also are part of a mums group. Jade is in here somewhere, who is an amazing collaborator on the mums group as well, which provides a safe space for mums and families of colour in York to come together. So yeah, that's what we do.
Okay, so we're going into a little centering practice, but first I just wanted to read these quotes because they were from like Instagram and lots of really, really amazing content at the moment in regard to like looking at decolonisation. So the first one is colonialism is not. I think, to be honest, both the student and we've mentioned this already. So colonisation is not a historical event that ended with the granting of independence to colonised countries. It's a structure that continues to inform our present. And then the second one, which is like describing why it's important for us to connect to our like mind, body, spirit while doing this work as well. So colonialism severed us from our roots, disconnected us from the sacred, and implanted a program that created allegiance to predatory ideals. So a lot of us who have like indigenous wisdom in our ancestry was like cut out. It wasn't seen as worthy of practicing. So it's asking us to like reconnect with these tools. Humanity can no longer afford to do things according to the Western world's values. So with that, I have to stay here, don't I? I want to run around. With that, I invite everyone to get into a comfortable seat. You don't have to join in with this if you don't want to. You can keep your eyes open, you can close them, you can just gently lower your head so that you can reduce the sensory input from these really white, bright lights that are in here. And I invite us all to kind of notice how you're breathing today. So that means you could perhaps put your hands on your belly, notice how you're breathing. We're connecting with who we are right now in this moment through our breath. My breath is very shaky. And then I invite us to draw attention to our heart center. So you can do that by doing Anjali Mudra, which is your hands in prayer position, or you can put your hands on your heart, or you can just draw attention to your heart center. So while we're here, I would like us to acknowledge the interconnectedness of everything. I'd like us to acknowledge that while we're here in this position, in this privileged position to be able to talk about decolonisation within an institution, decolonisation means something very different across the world. And right now, our hearts are with the Palestinian people, Congolese people, Sudanese people, for the experiences of genocide, the experience of displacement. Decolonisation means something different right now for people in those places. So while we're centering our heart, with focusing in on our heart, I request that I invite us to hold this as we move through the discussion today, and just connect to our humanity and our interconnectedness. Okay. So if you have your eyes closed, an invitation to look down, and you can flicker your eyes open slowly because it is really bright in here, and then reorient yourself back into the space. Thank you so much for joining that practice with me. I'll pass you back to Kate.
Thank you, Amy. That was beautiful. And we wanted to give you all that experience because, as Amy said, tuning into your body and your emotion is a strength from indigenised practices, and we're proud of that, and we think that these practices belong in classrooms, in lecture theatres, so we really wanted to come here and normalise that for you all. Thank you.
That's okay.
So this is a bit of a framework that we developed. To be honest, we didn't know who might be in the audience today, and we can see that fellow sisters and brothers are making up a majority of this audience, and we don't want to patronise everybody by going through the ABCs, but we wanted to keep this really accessible, and we wanted people to go away with something that feels snappy and that you can kind of remember, and so we've went with this framework of notice, ask and change, and these were touched on in the footnotes. Noticing the context, the history that's from the past. Once you recognise it, you will see it in everything. At the end of the day, an institution is inherently colonial, and when you start to break down where the colonialism lies, whether it's the bricks that form the early buildings, whether it's in the way that you were interviewed to come onto your course, whether it's the clothes that you wear to come to your lectures. Colonialism is embedded in everything in our society. We're spoon-fed colonialism from our early doors, from watching cartoons, from the way our parents taught us to speak so that we could get through certain doors. It's a really active process to start to notice where colonialism sits in our day-to-day. So noticing is the first step, and a way that you can sort of start to recognise where colonialism sits in your life is just keep asking yourself every day, where am I seeing it? Start having conversations with your fellows and with your tutors. And then ask yourself, what impact am I having in the present, right now? What could I be doing differently? Am I perpetuating these systems? Am I kind of telling somebody, oh, like, you shouldn't put that in your CV, actually. I don't think people want to know that you worked with those sorts of people. Or maybe you should change your name, use your white name. Think about how you may be perpetuating these systems. And I say this in the context of it's not safe for everybody to, decolonise their whole lives. And we'll go into that a bit later, how you navigate a really colonial institution. But start to ask yourself, where am I having an impact? Am I either kind of going along with the flow? Am I making things worse? Have I just kept doing something that's been a norm in our society? Start to ask yourself those things. And then finally, think about the future. How can you apply your lens and change direction? Think about what you can be doing proactively each day to change direction. Do you want to say anything on that framework?
Just to note that this is like a framework that's come from our own practice of like moving from colonised ways of being into decolonised, and we're still in that process. So it's like we've put this together based on our experience of YARC. So that's where it's come from. That's what I want to add.
And also we know that there's like amazing academics in this room that you will know far more than us, and this is like our approach from learning, from being on the ground in working in grassroots community activism. So forgive us if you feel like we've diluted what is a really important topic, but this was what felt right for us in this moment. So we've decided to take an approach of thinking about the characteristics, what look like coloniser characteristics. And before I go into this, I do want to say that you might see yourself in some of these characteristics. We see ourselves in them sometimes, and that's the reality of navigating a colonised country, colonised institution. And so, I just want to run through some of these behaviours that you might be noticing in yourself, more likely in maybe senior people in your institution. You might be noticing it in other power or decision makers. The coloniser characteristics include things like upholding old structures of hierarchy and social capital, separation and polarisation, so binary thinking, not acknowledging how history has impacted the present, hyper-individualism, apathy, the ability to dissociate from social injustice, and I've already heard about that today, and just a word on that. We recognise that those of you within this institution are navigating the confines of press teams and people who are trying to really close off your ability to show solidarity. And so, we send solidarity to all of you trying to navigate that. Extracting ideas from global majority people and not giving credit where it is due, and also noticing when it's consistently again and again people of colour who are doing the same work and not stepping in to carry that load and lighten the burden. Seeing only Western science as objective truths, emotional work being perceived as weak or unnecessary. Like, that's just another point on that. Like, we want to advocate for all of you to go to your professors, go to your peers and tell them how you feel. Like, that's what's really important. And again and again, this colonial world that is tightly intertwined with capitalism only believes impact is built off of profit, and we know that impact is in feeling and relationship, and that's really important. opting of using ways that harm minoritized communities, using old language theory and rhetoric that invalidates the work, and lacking of plurality. And we've got these like silly little character blobs, and this is as optional. You can start to see the colonizer and re-indigenizer characters, and try and lean in when you can to your re-indigenizer and decolonizer character, and notice when the other one is playing a bigger role in your day-to-day. So what do the re-indigenizer characteristics look like? Being curious and deliberate about making changes in curriculum, and we'll talk about this in a sec. Being open to being wrong, accepting challenge and being open-minded to change. Regularly asking, am I or is my work perpetuating systems of oppression? Acknowledging and counteracting unconscious bias, avoiding terminology that is triggering, reductive, and which conflates diverse places or people, accepting that multiple truths exist, centering Indigenous and ethnic wisdom and science, community-focused and community-centred learning, which is what Kai's done today, which is beautiful. Finding creative ways to include everybody, openly giving credit where credit is due, acknowledging the lineage of knowledge, pushing back on hustle culture and other pressures applied by capitalism, and making time to teach critically and support the exploration of racialised identities. So I just want to talk a bit about I know that it sounds like some work is already happening at the university on decolonising the curriculum. I just want to talk about the work that I did with some brilliant people over at the National Society of Art and Design. They already have a absolutely brilliant decolonised curriculum for the field of art, but all of it is so transferable. The QR code is up there if you want to scan in, and I can also share some details with Kai later, but they're asking the really important questions, whether you're supporting yourself and your colleagues to potentially challenge conversations about unconscious bias and the favouring of what is closest to our own identities, whether your curriculum allows for opportunities to ask about the cultures, makers, and artworks and objects that you use. Have you considered the Western lens through which art, craft and design is often viewed in museums behind glass and cabinets? This may be different to Indigenous populations where we deem to be, sorry, my contacts have gone, where what we deem to be a community's or nation's artworks are in fact meant to be interacted with, worn or used. So that's really important to us. Art is not just what goes on white walls. It is the words we speak, it is the clothes that we wear. Art does not belong to the West, it doesn't belong to Europe. The global majority world has such a rich art history. But these questions are obviously centred to art, but they're very transferable.
Okay, now after hearing about our coloniser and then re-indigeniser, this is a bit about YARC and what we do to decolonise. I was going to say to decolonising, that doesn't make sense, but to actively decolonise our processes. So the first thing that we do is we have frequent and ongoing, complex and collective discussions. We've had the same discussions for the last 3 years around certain things, and that's important. This is undoing a structure that's existed for so many hundred years. It's going to take a while for us to try and work out how we can be decolonised within this society. We are a big believer in slow activism, so taking things slowly. Rest is Resistance, which is a movement by Tricia Hersey, a Black American woman, and we act we keep that very near and dear to our hearts. If we do things too quickly, we're just subscribing to capitalism, subscribing to colonial ways of being. And I used to work at the university a little bit, and I feel like it was very quick. Everything had to be done very quickly. We need to slow down, and that's something we've been unlearning ourselves at YARC. It's been hard because you want to get everything done really quickly, but just take it easy. Like Kate mentioned, decolonising art. I think from that, personally, I've learned a lot about anti-perfectionism from decolonising art. I wouldn't have identified as an artist at all before doing this work, and understanding what an artist is and decolonising art. So I think like realizing that and realizing the importance of anti-perfectionism, that we don't have to get it right all the time, and actually by making mistakes, by like doing something maybe, you know, slightly that made us spend more money or something, is all part of like building a resilient community, which is what we want. We want to build a resilient community that are there for each other, that can work through difficulties. And we can't do that if we are constantly like striving for perfection. It just turns competitive and capitalistic and whatnot. So it's a really key concept for us. And then from like a practical perspective, we've been on and off having conversation after conversation about our legal structure. So a community group like ours tend to just become a charity, right? So you sign up with the charity commission and then you abide by charity law. Now, as you can imagine, the charity commission is very oppressive and is like got really like colonial legacy, is like all over it. So we were like, okay, we don't want to do that, but how can we exist within the current structures? How can we get funding for our projects? How can we protect our community without signing up and subscribing to the Charity Commission? And the way that we have done it, the way that we are doing it, because it takes time, is by not becoming a charity to start with, and also just being more creative and learning about all these different movements within community organising that don't just align with Charity Commission. So we've decided, so we're an unincorporated, constituted community group. Those words don't mean much maybe right now, but it's taken us time to like get to know what they mean. So unincorporated means, actually I'm not going to do that word, unincorporated, we're just not a legal entity at all. Constituted means that we have a constitution that outlines certain legal things that we should abide by, that most charities have. Funnily enough though, I was in a meeting with someone the other week, with you as well, and they said, we don't have a constitution because it's really oppressive. And I thought, really? You don't have to have a constitution? So, you know, we're always changing, and it's a conversation we're going to have. It's like, do we really need a constitution? Maybe we don't. Maybe we could create something completely new, and that's what's so exciting about working with YARC, is that we are looking for like creative and alternative ways of organising as a community, and willing to like change our minds on things all the time. We've changed our minds so much on so many different things, as guided by the needs of our community. I put here limited, is that all I wanted to say about? Yeah, I put here limited hierarchy. I would love to put no hierarchy, but I don't think that's where we're at right now. I still think there is a lot of work for us to do in regard to like actually being a flatline structure, which is what we strive to be. Now in a university that's going to be really difficult to do. I hear people talking about hierarchy and whatnot, and perhaps I actually learned from some colleagues that sometimes hierarchy is needed for protection, for certain things. You know, it can be a helpful thing when you're in such a rigid institution. If it was flatline, people are getting paid different amounts, is it really not hierarchy? You know, there's so many questions. So for us, it's limited hierarchy. We would like it to be flatline. The way that we operate is people in our community will come to us, and when I say us, it's kind of the advisory board who advise on issues that we like move through as a collective, with an idea, and we say, okay, let's get this out. Let's get you some money for that. Let's get like whatever you need. Let's sort it out, and then that person can then go ahead with that project. So there is some sort of hierarchy because, for example, I hold a lot of the knowledge around how to get funding, how to get money. So I do hold some power over how projects get started. So it's acknowledging those power dynamics exist. They're very real, and it's okay to have them as long as you're not using it, you know, in a bad way, I guess. And then decolonising policies and procedures. That's something that I'm doing a lot with Baobab Foundation. So they are like a Black-led global majority organisation. It's amazing to work there. I come out of every meeting like, learned so much. And it's focusing on like, when you think about policies and procedures, so if this is part of your role in HR or whatever, I think probably a lot of people make policies and procedures in the university, maybe not just HR, but it's like, do we need to write it in this way, or is there a more creative way we could be doing this? An example being, EDI policies tend to be very focused on the Equality Act and discrimination, and kind of just the legal definitions. And if you're like me, I don't have much faith in, you know, the law and the way that the Equality Act is. I don't think it's good enough, it's not good enough, it 100% isn't. So why do we focus our policies just on that? It's like just the basis of what we need. Instead, let's like reimagine how we'd want to see inclusion in our institution or in our collective. Like, we want it to be anti-ableist, we want it to have like all the intersecting oppressions, anti-classist, which gets hardly talked about within the kind of mainstream. And then the final thing is, have I been talking for ages? Is that okay? Okay, sorry, not very good with time. Bank account. So when I mentioned about the legal structure on that journey of like, should we become a legal entity, blah, 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 we have come across some amazing alternative ways of organising. And for example, is our bank account. So this is an organisation called Social Change Nest, and they create, they allow for tiny community groups like ours to have access to a bank account, because we can't get access to a bank account unless we're a charity, so we can't get any money. So this organisation is amazing, and it's a transparent bank account. You can search us, you can go onto York Anti-Racist Collective page, you can see all of our money, you can see everything. Transparency is so key in decolonising. You can see exactly where our money is going, you can question it, you can also request for some money. If you need money, I mean, we don't have any. We don't have any yet, but like a lot of mutual aid collectives operate on Social Change Nest, where people can just request money anonymously, and then, you know, and so it's just such a great resource. So basically, we're trying to find processes, systems, ways of working, ways of being that are unimaginable potentially within an institution, but we want to try to do things differently. Oh yeah, it's still me, isn't it? Okay, so this is the three-step framework, an example. What example was I going to use? Oh yeah, okay, so the three-step framework for YARC, an example being, when we first started, we started by doing like typically anti-racist stuff. So we were like, oh, it was a bad time. I think Kai might have come to a few of those. We were meeting with the council, we were going on these boards and all these different things, and we were just, honestly, no one was listening to us. We were being shut out, dismissed. And what that left was a group of very burnt out, unwell, mentally unwell. I was very mentally unwell at this time. Group of people who then couldn't take any action. We were like, we just couldn't do anything. So at that point we noticed, we were like, we're all very unwell. I took like 3 months off, and quite a lot of us didn't really connect much right at the start. I think actually you, JJ, you might remember as well this time. And we were like, okay, we are upholding systems here by subscribing to capitalist ways of being, like going to all the meetings. We need to have a voice at every table, all this really, really difficult stuff. And then we realised that we're not actually doing anything now. So we noticed it, we realised that we were acting in a way that wasn't reflective of what our community needed and wanted. Then we asked ourselves, what impact were we having? Well, I've kind of described the impact, not really that much, other than harm towards ourselves and our community. And then we were like, okay, let's not do any of that. Let's just not. We started declining all the meetings. We were like, this is not for us. And instead we realised that we need to build community. York is very different to a lot of cities. If you've lived in different cities, you'll know. Like, York doesn't have like the physical infrastructure for us to like meet up, and for like global majority of people to meet up. It doesn't have like a sense of community. I say doesn't have. It's beginning to have, I'd like to think. So then we changed and we thought, right, well-being first. We need to get better, we need to get well, we need to build community. And that is an example of how we use the framework to move from a kind of colonised way of working within anti-racism to a decolonised way of working that's more community-focused. Do you want to add anything?
Oh, at the end of this, maybe.
Okay, I'm going to read this bit just because I wrote it. So this is a word on realities, which I think everyone has mentioned, I think. So many academics, theorists, writers, creatives and activists believe that we need to abolish institutions such as the police, education. This means that instead of chipping away at racism, sexism, the intersectional oppressions experienced within an institution and trying to change it from the inside, abolitionists believe that the current system as it stands should be abolished in order for new and emergent ideas to sprout that do not have the root of injustice at its core, right? So people often ask, what would we do without insert institution here? And for this, as YARC, we've kind of learnt the importance of imagination work, and this is coming from black feminist writers, like the lineage of knowledge of imagination work. So instead of thinking, what would we do if this didn't exist, accessing this imagination work through things like centering practices, yoga, like these sort of indigenous wisdom practices, we can ask questions like, how would we like society to operate? What could a socially just university look like? What would it actually look like? What would the buildings look like? What would the people look like? What would you be wearing? Like all these different things you can think of and imagine this place in your mind. Would it be unrecognizable to the current way things are? And doing this big imagination work can guide us to reimagine our day-to-day work, which is what we practice in YARC. So you do this big imagination work, and then you break it down to what you can be doing today. And that's what we do at YARC. Thank you. Do you want to say something?
Just really quickly that we're talking about systems change, we're talking about abolition. I think somebody said earlier, like ED&I is not how you resolve decolonisation. There's more work to be done. We're here and we're thinking about what that future looks like. And if you want to join us on that journey, get in touch. If you are a global majority person and you want to join our community, get in touch. If you're a mum of colour or if you're a white parent who has children of colour, get in touch. We are trying to build a community in York. Thankfully, the institution is slightly more multi-cultural than like those that still live and occupy kind of jobs and space in York. But we're trying to build a community and we're trying to build that future that we're talking about. So we'd love it to be collaborative, and please come and take part in this imagination process. Thank you for having us.
Thanks. There you go.
As someone who's used to chairing events, I've never had to hold myself back so much to remind time, because exactly what you said about taking it slowly and actually taking time in that process to think, to figure out, and then sometimes we think out loud, as I might probably do it now. Thank you so much, Amy and Kate. I have so many questions, taken notes, but I think because of the, sadly, ironically, time limit, at this time I'd like to invite our panelists to take a seat at the front, so we can actually use this as opportunity. I wonder whether you have any questions and response to Kate and Amy as well. So there are microphones, so for our online audience and actually for our audience, it's easier if we speak into the microphone so they can hear quite clearly. I also noticed that we have a few questions online, which I'm going to try and pick up later as well. So these two can be used as well. Yep. Enough microphones there to the... I'll leave one over here. Right, so you can pass it around. So at this stage, what I'd like to do is to ask the panelists to introduce yourself. Like I said, what do you do, what do you want people to know about you here? But also, if you have any, what have you done in terms of decolonising? How do you respond to the topic today in terms of decolonising? I'm going to move us to this so people who join us later can know where we're at. And then just to emphasize again, we do have a Padlet. If anyone wants to share what you've done so far, what's the practice in your own local community departments, please feel free to add there. I know I suspect Carisha added something onto the Padlet. Yes. So I will leave it to the panelists. So if you would introduce yourself, and then we can think about, what Amy and Kate have said, and anything you'd like to respond to.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? I really don't like these microphones, they're always so awkward, aren't they? So hi everyone, my name's Shazia Jagger. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of English and Related Literature, and I'll say a little bit about the kind of work that I've been doing around decolonising since I arrived in the university, but also want to preface these comments by actually the things I've been thinking about lately, reading and what's been weighing heavily on me, is around the kind of the challenges that I've faced, but also the fact that myself, I feel like I failed at a lot of the work that I've wanted to do, or the spaces that I've been in, and there's a real sense of fatigue as well. And that's partly because we work in particular structures and particular kind of university, and kind of thinking about the kinds of amazing ways you're thinking imaginatively outside of a structure, and the ways in which the university itself is a structure that is maybe too much for one person or even for a few people to try and take on. Anyway, so I joined the department in 2019 as a lecturer. I was the only person of colour in my department, but that quickly changed, and we are one of the departments that has probably one of the most diverse departments in the university, actually, right now, and that's saying a lot. We often look at each other, we have to talk to each other, my colleagues of colour, and with a kind of realisation that we never expected to be in a department where there'd be more than one of us. And that's the reality of academic life, actually. That's the reality of working in a humanities department in particular as well. So that's kind of a new reality for us to kind of be thinking about kind of collaboratively. But when I joined the department in 2019, I was very soon kind of thrust into very different spaces across the university where I was talking about decolonising. And I was talking about decolonising not necessarily because of expertise in my research, although my research does touch on ideas of pre-modern ideas of colonialism and race, but because of my positionality. So as somebody who comes from a working class background, I'm a Muslim, I've got British Indian, with also connections to Southern Africa in my in my own kind of positionality. And I was talking about decolonising in different spaces with the Students' Union, with the library, within the department, within the Humanities Research Centre. And in 2020, I decided to co-found a network with two of my colleagues in the English department, Alexandra Kingston-Rees and Lola Borman, and we decided to come up with a decolonising network where we could try and go into different spaces across the university and try and join up some of the different conversations that we were having within the university. There was lots and lots of appetite for this decolonising network. It grew really quickly. It was about the same time that Jess was doing lots of work with student interns, and we connected through that. But it grew too big for us, and there was no way for us to be able to kind of handle the work that was coming out of this network, but also that we were then being put into spaces where people expected us to give them expert advice, as though they could turn to us and say, how do we do this? Tell us the answer. And that's not what we wanted to do, and we didn't have, this is a collaborative space, we're all learning together, and this real sense that this is a verb, right, decolonising, that it is about kind of an action and work that we're doing together. And then also the structures of an academic life, the workload of an academic, just kind of put huge pressures on us, and it wasn't something that we were able to do within the structures of our own workloads, which is a kind of a whole other kind of conversation within the department, and so it kind of fell away and fell apart, and it also meant that there wasn't really a space for us to be able to do things with students in the way that I would have hoped that we could have done. Although I know Sarika is here and is thinking hard about kind of the seminar space, and so hopefully things will be coming out of that soon. And there are things that we're doing with the inclusive learning team and getting students to do some more kind of co-creation work. But really, I guess those are kind of the ways in which I have been thinking about decolonising, the ways that I'm involved in decolonising. But really it is about kind of challenges and facing those kind of, facing my own failures, I think, or feeling like I failed in some ways as well. Yeah, okay, I'll hand over to
Trish. Hi. I'm hoping, does this mic work? Can everyone hear me? No? It's fantastic. You can hear me because I'm really loud instead, isn't it? Is that better? Is it this one? Fantastic, good start. Hi everyone, my name is Trish Chinzara. I am a PhD student in the Department of Psychology. Thank you for the really comprehensive overview. I feel like the pressure to be the next one. So I work quite closely with Carisha on kind of decolonising attempts within our sort of department. And I think from my own personal experience as a student, it's really inspired me to kind of get more involved and understand the framework and the sort of, I guess, staging of society that limits us. So for me personally, I kind of had a very different approach. As a migrant student, I went from, going to schools where I was within the majority to now being the only black PhD student in my department. And that was a very stark experience for me, and I realised things like the attainment gap really needed to be improved and done better. But I also felt a great sense of apathy, especially during my undergraduate studies, where I didn't feel like I was in a space where I belonged. And I think that fueled me throughout sort of my academic journey to ensure that other students don't really feel that way, because it's already really difficult being at university and moving to a new space, let alone being a minority student who's then having to deal with microaggressions, macroaggressions on top of all of that. And I would hate for any other students who come to institutions to feel that way. I've been very fortunate that York, I've not really had many experiences. Of course, there will be opportunities where it does happen, but I think here we're really good at fostering a sense of community, and I'm really proud to be part of, I guess, a community like this where we have open, honest conversations about our experiences and our kind of attempts to decolonialise our environments. So a couple of the things that we've been doing and focusing more on is creating safe spaces for students, but also really highlighting intersectionality, which I don't think gets touched upon a lot. I am not only a migrant, I'm a black student who's also got a mental health disability, and I think in our community we don't really talk about it much, so that's the sort of thing that I'm kind of really focused on as well.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, so hi, I'm Chandria. I am a third year undergraduate student in psychology, and a lot of the work I do around sort of decolonisation is with Carisha and Trish. So the projects I sort of mentioned is stuff that I am kind of involved in. And so I wanted to say thank you to Kai for kind of being open about being nervous, because me too. So if my hands are shaking with the microphone, then I apologise. So I think the only thing I'll really say is that I think in these conversations there's two things that we have to focus on, which is that they're supposed to be uncomfortable and they're supposed to be imperfect. And I think if you become comfortable with those two things, then that's how you move forwards. But yeah. Sorry. So I have to hold.
That's a lot to do all at once.
Just start speaking into it.
Oh, okay. There we go. Hi everyone. So I'm Carisha. That was mentioned before. I am an associate lecturer in the psychology department, but I also was a PhD student here. When I came straight fresh off the boat, as we like to say, from Trinidad to become a PhD student in 2009. At that point, I didn't really realize how disengaged I had become, because I was then only when I came to this country was I very much aware of the fact that I was black. In my country, I'm just normal. And the perceptions that people had. So one time my supervisor made a statement about if she was in Trinidad as a white person, and then I'm like, but Trinidad has white people, we have mixed up people all over the place. But just the perceptions that people have of countries that I and other people who we do in the decolonial process for is one of the things that we have to be sure do not actually get translated into how we then teach. So when we started doing our recent curriculum review workshops, we then had issues where when with discussing the riots, are we ensuring that we only show, are we ensuring that we do not only suggest that the riots were performed by black people? Like those little things, are we perpetuating our perceptions in any way when we stand in front of the classroom? Because those are the things that our students will pick up on, because they'll already be hyper-vigilant about the fact that they're different, like I was when I was a PhD student, and so we are more likely to pick up on those little things, even though it was not intentional. I then went to Birmingham, which still has my heart, because I will get on the bus and I'll hear a Caribbean accent, and I will be able to get a good curry. York is still struggling with that for me. And then I came back here. It was very much of a discussion about me coming back here, because again, I would no longer have the Caribbean accents, be able to talk the way I want. I have to come back here and do what we call cloaking. So cloaking is when a black person or an ethnic minority has to speak a certain way and hold themselves a certain way. And I had not had to do that in Birmingham because I was teaching people who were like me, and so I can speak to them in slang. Don't get me wrong, it made my white colleagues uncomfortable, and that was the first time I was told I should speak the Queen's English when I speak to my students. Don't get me wrong, I then spoke slang more than ever, because that's the type of person my mama raised. And so coming back up here, when the decolonisation process first started in our department, it wasn't something that I was keen on, because I was still coming to terms of who I was since George Floyd died. Haircut was the main thing that happened after that, but it was a strong psychological process. And I didn't want to be the spearheading person that became the activist, because I still had to sort out my own personal issues in relation to that. So it started off with our students just giving presentations, etc. But when we then interacted with other departments and saw what they were doing, we're like, okay, there actually has to be an action. This actually has to generate change. And there was slight kind of reluctance for that to actually happen. And so again, my mama raised me. And so I then said, okay, this is now a priority for me. And that is why we then had students, luckily, who were also as keen to make change. And we did different things like getting the learning and teaching fund, showing that it was not just something that needed a tick box, but it was actually impacting our students' well-being, and so it needed to be made as a priority. And so we've come a long way, and we have curriculum review workshops going on where students such as Chandria are seeing like, okay, this is something that is triggering, or this is something that needs to be handled better. And we're in the process of hopefully getting another learning and teaching fund, wink wink, and doing further change within the department and expanding it outside. But that is my story. You don't have to press a button.
Okay, hi, I'm Eleanor Brown. I'm from the Education Department. I work in the Centre for Education and Social Justice. And so, I mean, I feel very humbled to be here today alongside such amazing panellists, and we've had some really great forewords and such an inspiring presentation just now from Yark as well. So I'm part of the Decolonising Education Collective in the Education Department, which I'm going to let Josh and Zarina talk a bit more about in a moment, because I thought I'd just explain a little bit about how I came to some of this work. And I think for me, the original way that I started to become interested in the sort of what decolonising is and what it means and why it's important for everybody to get involved in that work was around the kind of the ideas around epistemic injustice and the notion that there are many ways of thinking, many ways of knowing, many ways of being, and those ways we've all been kind of severed from those kind of indigenizing ways of knowing and ways of being by these dominant discourses that have replaced that, particularly in institutions so entrenched in colonialism like a university. And so while working within that, I felt that it was very important to do that work of trying to re-indigenize and to capture some of those other ways of knowing, which should have a place in an institution which is around knowledge and knowledge production and ways of knowing. And so I became involved with DEC when we started it a few years ago, and it was very much set up to try and be a non-hierarchical safe space that was a collective of staff and students working together trying to address some of these issues. And we kind of came up with a number of different actions that we took forward. We had interns, so students from the collective in paid roles during the summer vacation periods doing different projects. And one of the first projects that we had is we did a kind of an audit and an analysis of some of our programs, trying to look at ways in which we could decolonize some of the education programs that we teach on. And and so through that work we came up with some ideas of ways that we could actually kind of try to put this into practice, and so we had to restructure a lot of our course for the new semesterization and modularization. So we used that opportunity to really try to change some of both the content and the pedagogies of the ways that we did things in the department. And so one of the modules that I've been most involved with, so we did that kind of across the whole program. I'm the program leader for our BA education as well, and so we did quite a lot of work in trying to think about the frame of the program and the content and the kind of pathways through it. But one of the kind of key things that we worked on was a module which is called Worldviews, Knowledge and Education, which is a second-year module, and it's a core module because I think one of the problems that we often talk about doing this work is that you often just end up speaking with like-minded people about these things, and actually it's important as well for everybody to be part of that conversation. And so it's a core second-year module, and as the title suggests, we try to incorporate lots of different worldviews in what we talk about in that module. But one of the things that I felt very strongly about was ensuring that we kind of looked at decolonising the pedagogies as well, which is very difficult in the kind of hierarchical institution. And I think, as Amy was saying before, we have to acknowledge that there are hierarchies. We can't get rid of them entirely. At the end of the day, I'm still going to be a member of staff in the room, and the students are still students, but there is a way in which, we try to find different ways in which we could try to break those hierarchies down and try to kind of co-create as much as possible the content with the students. And so one of the things that we did, we have 3 members of staff who teach on the module, and all 3 members of staff attend every session. So a lot of modules that are co-taught, staff kind of parachute in, deliver their content, and then they're gone the next week as though they don't have anything to learn from each other. And so we wanted to work on this premise that we're all learners, that we all have something to learn from each other, both from each other, from the students. And so we also fought for there to be 4 hours a week. That was the maximum that we could get. But rather than again having a kind of 2-hour lecture in which you deliver content, we wanted it to be there to be time. And again, this kind of goes back to that point of these things taking so much time. And 4 hours is not sufficient time, but it's better than 1 hour, which sometimes is the amount of time that you have to kind of deliver content. And so we have 2 2-hour sessions. And then one of those sessions each week is facilitated by students. So they work in groups, and they have each group facilitates for one of the hours, and then another group. So rather than it be student presentations, they have the opportunity to facilitate activities and to bring ideas and content that they're interested in exploring further with the group. We've done quite a lot of work on kind of grounding practices at the beginning of sessions, the way that Amy did this afternoon, and trying to encourage students to embody other ways of being and knowing in the classroom, and to be present in the space. We've encouraged a reduction, we wanted to boycott, but we've encouraged a reduction of technology, again, in that idea that we're present in the space, that we have a dialogue in the space. And a lot of the focus is on dialogue and on trying to create spaces for group work, activities that encourage people to be able to participate in different formats, however they feel comfortable. And I mean, I can perhaps report back on this later. We're halfway through, so we'll see how that goes. But I think that was kind of the main thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of one of the things that's come out of the decolonising, like one of the very tangible things, I guess, that's come out of the decolonising education collective that we've worked on. But there have been many other things, so I'm going to hand over to Josh and Serena to talk a bit about some of the other things that we've done as well.
Hello, everyone. I'll get it. It's okay. It's a microphone. Apologies for that. I am a third-year psychology and education student, and in my first year of university, I kind of came into DecolonisINg Education Collective at the same time as I applied for the role to be our Black, Asian, and minority ethnic student representative within the department, BAME, but that could be a whole other conversation today. And what I noticed, I think, initially in that role is the importance of different spaces and the time and place for different things. Within BAME, it's a difficult, yeah. Within my role as the BAME rep, there was a clear need for affinity spaces and group collaboration and shared experience, but also within DEC, the realization, microphones are dropping everywhere. The realization that there are different ways of thinking and different ways of approaching things. And what I realized is that my one way isn't necessarily better or worse than, but what I struggled with within DEC, and still struggle, I think, even today, is the differing kind of ideologies and ways that we approach things and how we invite conversation and how we invite difficult conversation. Because I think, as Shan was saying, we need to be uncomfortable to a certain extent, but we also need the opportunity to feel safe and to be able to speak with people and not feel ridiculed and have the ability to share what we're feeling. I think what I'm hoping for out of looking at grassroots efforts is the idea of community building and getting to know different communities, but also within that is understanding the differences aren't necessarily as big or as challenging as we often portray them, and kind of moving on from the polarization of, political concepts, race, gender, everything that we like to, and in our nature, to categorize. It's easy for us to categorize. That's how we've survived for so many years. There's that urge. But moving on and forward from that is something that I'm really interested in doing.
Hi everyone, my name is Josh. I'm also in the education department and I'm part of DEC. I joined DEC from probably a different place to a lot of other people. I grew up in South Africa for 18 years and I feel like white students and activists there, for white people, the conversation about race is done wrong and it isn't done correctly, and I never felt a responsibility to get involved in that conversation, never felt like it was my responsibility. And kind of coming to university and joining DEC, I really felt this collective effort and this collective need for me to get involved at certain times and to really take a step back and listen, but to kind of be present in that conversation. And it's something I really value, and I've been really honoured to kind of get that platform in DEC. But something I feel about DEC, and me and Zarina speak about a lot, is the fact that we're having the same conversations with the same people a lot. And even, I was a new voice in my first year as someone who had never had this conversation before, but it's now been 3 years and I've been having the conversations with the same 3 people. So this year we've really focused on kind of mainstreaming the conversation and bringing it more into academic culture and the culture within university life and even social culture. I think we're in a unique institution with our kind of intercollegiate culture of how does decolonising practices kind of infiltrate themselves into our social culture. So we've been looking at kind of how we mainstream this conversation, and we've kind of turned to creating a website and like multimedia efforts and a podcast, and that's something that I'm really passionate about. Partly because kind of out of university I'm very lucky to be the artistic director of a theatre company that is committed to decolonising and diversifying theatre practices. So looking at how we can kind of use creativity and theatre within these spaces to kind of like decolonise the discourse that we're having through different theatre practices, which is inherently kind of indigenous, and I think that's very important. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you all very much. I kind of feel like I shouldn't, but I probably need to step in a little bit because of the time. So are we okay with opening it up to discussion with everyone here who's present? And I noticed that there are a few questions online as well, so I'm going to go check later as well. So would anyone here have any response questions? I know we're in a kind of a challenging conversation to almost like talking around what decolonising might mean and then what you have done, but necessarily answering the direct question of how do we do it. And I suspect that's actually quite key, where we don't have a kind of bullet points of this is how we do it, but there's a lot of talking to each other, exploring locally what might be suitable and the way we approach it. So is that kind of the feeling? And one of the things I'm really curious about is creativity and imagination. And I was wondering, in your work, how does that fuel, support your decolonising approach?
Or is it just extremely difficult with the workload, limited time, and the nature, that shouldn't be nature, of working in academia?
Well, I can say a little bit about that. So I feel like this idea of reimagining what education is and what education means is something that I've done a little bit of in my work. I'm part of a group that's not, I guess, mainly people in academic institutions, although it is partly that, of reimagining education and a collaborative called the Ecoversities Alliance, which is a group of people who are kind of challenging the structures and the concept of universities and trying to think about how we can reimagine other ways of knowing and other ways of educating around those things, particularly in a kind of higher education space. And I think it's true that the time aspect is one of the most challenging aspects, because these things do take a really long time. But and I think being part of a community is something that's really key in terms of being able to take that time and do those things. So I guess I'm part of that online community doing some of that. But yeah, I guess that's the kind of the way that I'm interacting with that. But it's a really challenging thing to do, to try to find the space and the time to be able to really reimagine how that might look.
Okay, so thank you for that. I think that when it comes to decolonizing, we have to think of it more than just in terms of us being here telling people or advising people on how things should change, but also like passionately creating change makers who, when we're tired and just give up, or never happen, not until I die, but when we die, will then be able to carry it on. So it's about like kind of ensuring that when we're doing the work, we're passing on that passion. And I'd just like to talk a bit more about like what Jess has suggested in terms of having students as co-creators. And I think that is the most creative thing that we can see that we've done in psychology. We have ensured that anything that we decide, we run it by our students to ensure that like it makes sense to them, that it will appeal to students. Don't get me wrong, we still have that lack of engagement because it's seen as a work frustrating people and not for everyone. So the whole concept of allyship is something that we do need to work on. But when we talk about creatively as well, like when we then run our research or run our projects or hear what students are saying to us, do we then act on it? So then when we were doing the projects that we explored, BAME students, well, all students' experiences of the curriculum as it stands, what came out was that there was not just the curriculum itself, but the curriculum was then having prevailing effects on their other experiences in the university. And so the social environment also came out as a factor, even though we never really asked about that. And so within psychology, we were then creative in developing safe spaces. So we have, for instance, the BAME Chill Corner, which is hopefully going to be spread across the faculty. Sam, changemaker. And so we're then gonna we have that in place, but also for the East Asian students who struggle in terms of learning in a second language, we have the intercultural committee that came out of research as well. So it's about listening to what these students are saying to us and ensuring that we're decolonizing all these spaces that they're telling us need to be decolonized as well.
I guess my only thing to add to that would be, in terms of creativity, there's an element of no one in these spaces have told me I'm wrong, for example. So it's like everyone's opinion is sort of valued in the same way, and if you have a way of thinking that you can do something, then you can try it out, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you move on. I think that's again with the imperfections thing, like not everything you try is going to be successful, and people might not turn up, or like people might not agree with what you've said, but that's okay. And I think a lot of that work is about being okay with things not going the way you want it to, because it won't, and change only happens through those little mistakes, and I might not see the change before I leave university, but hopefully eventually that will happen, and I think that is what we have to sit with, basically.
Or when you leave, we'll just try to find a way to get you back, like we have been doing.
She is not leaving. I guess just to add to that, especially as a student, I think hearing the term decolonisation, it's such a big term and it's so heavy loaded. And, you know, there's so many different aspects to decolonisation that it's really difficult sometimes to just simply grasp it as a concept. So one of the really important things that we kind of did in our approach in psychology is just to listen. And I think that's something that we forget. Sometimes we're very action focused on seeing change and seeing progress and doing the research. But I found it, especially through my own student experience, I'm still a student, I don't know why I keep saying that, but through my own experiences, both through my undergrad and masters, because it's not just about, okay, cool, we've got colonial roots, we've got, you know, trauma that's potentially been passed through that we're then dealing with, and then all the changes of society on top of our workload. It's breaking it down and being like, okay, let's pick one small topic, let's talk about it more broadly, and then let's consider it in the context of decolonisation. What are the sorts of impacts that it has on the spaces where you're potentially a minority, whether you're a majority? So where Carisha was talking earlier about like code switching or cloaking, I think we discuss it a lot. Like, I'm a developmental researcher, so we discuss it a lot in spaces to do with like autism, and that's often where it's discussed. But I think if we take a look and we break down, a lot of us often do cloak, even when we don't realise it. And it was through conversations with my students that I realised that I've been cloaking since I was 6. And that's a long time to cloak, to a point where I can't undo that. But having those discussions, I've been aware of my own behaviours and the way that I adapt and change them to fit into a space where I'm never the majority. And I think it's being aware of that and having those discussions that's probably the first step towards decolonising, is just listening to people who need that kind of movement and change.
I think another thing we often look for is like the best solution. And the best way to go about something. What is kind of wasteful, what is not working, what can we improve on? And through DEC, it made it very obvious that there's so many different things, and you see that also with YARC, in how you're changing the way you're approaching things. You're consistently trying to reconsider, is this what we need at this given moment in time? Not saying that that is the best way to approach it forever, not saying that that's the best way to approach it in another university or in a secondary school or in a workplace environment. It's that that's what we need at this given moment. And I guess kind of going back to the idea of labeling things, is we want that kind of concrete idea of, oh, this is definitely going to work, this is how we can kind of share it with other people, which we definitely need to be able to say what are 3 kind of tangible goals, ways in which we can get to a point that we want to have. But within that, you also need to be open to differing experiences. And if you get halfway through, and like you said, you've used a bunch of resources and you realize this isn't working, it's not beneficial to continue going down in the same way that you've been doing for however, like 6 months. Being open to moving on from ideas, but also retrying similar ideas and tweaking it, I would say is extremely valuable. And also collaborating with people who have different goals. You have grassroots organizations, there's policy making teams. You need to be able to realize what exactly are your advantages, what are you really good at as a team, as an individual, where might you be lacking, where might you need more support, and really being confident in going out and asking for that support, even if you don't necessarily or aren't able to kind of describe what you think that is. The more you engage in things, the more you kind of work through intricacies, the more you will be able to figure out what is working right now and what might be working in the future.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or response in the audience here? We do have a few online. I suspect what we really want to do really is to just finish the event and get together and start kind of talking to each other and having that community that we want, isn't it? So can I quickly just kind of look at a few questions that we've had. And Amy and Kate, I wonder if you want to join at the front, because I feel like some of the questions might be relevant to your talk as well. Sorry about that. We have a comment in the question. It says, the workload sounds enormous and potentially overwhelming. How is it? Is it being broken down and prioritized? we got some people in there. I'd imagine there's a question on the workload on decolonising. How is it being broken down and prioritized?
Right, well, for context, I'm a PhD student, I'm a GTA, I'm also an RA, and I also do this. So I'm doing a lot of stuff, I'm in loads of spaces, but I think ultimately this is important to me, and I think you find time for the things that are important, but I also think it's really important you value your mental health as well, so obviously prevent burnout. I think you working collaboratively in spaces such as this, you learn that you shouldn't be placing all of the burden on yourself, and you find that there are a lot more people, whether it's within your department or whether it's in your workplaces or wherever you are, that are actually passionate about it. They're just afraid about having the discussions. So if you start having conversations with people and opening it up, you can then, I guess, not only get more opportunities, but it also offers you chances to offload that workload and spread it more. I think we have to stop thinking about it as being it's me versus everyone else, and rather it's a collective community and a collective space, and we're all working together, rather than it just being everything that you do on your own.
Okay, and also kind of, as in terms of the hierarchical structure, we tend to think as staff we need to do everything and like guide the students and don't put so much pressure on them, but Chandra can tell you she has just as much work to do as I do. So we'll kind of see the students as equal partners and equal contributors to the process, so that essentially it's not about you to come up with all the ideas of how things are going. You just have a brainstorming session. We had one on Friday. We came up with a good, well, hopefully, cross fingers, good application for the Changemakers competition. So hopefully that could be something that changes the way we do things, where it's about letting everybody be equal partners in the process, and that breaks down the workload as well.
Thank you. So I had a quick question, especially when it comes to talking about workload. A lot of that onus is placed on one side of the dynamic. And I was wondering, especially, was it Shazi, is that your name? When you were talking about building camaraderie amongst colleagues or within our fellow students, it's your obligation as the global majority to build that with others. As a white person, obs, it's a lot easier for me to have those influences. What can the white colleagues do or the white students do to proactively create that camaraderie? Because it's not always just about not being racist or not, creating microaggressions. What can you do to facilitate that conversation for other people and to create that kind of more flat hierarchy? It's a very difficult question, but I didn't know if anybody had anything to add. Thanks.
Well, I could just say, get involved. Just get involved with, you can also start talking to each other and start getting involved with things and create your own networks and collaborate together. I think there's nothing stopping you from getting involved, kind of thinking about allyship, and speaking to each other, and also, and I guess following that 3-step guide that we heard from Yark, kind of knowing where you're at in that process as well.
When it comes to the term of allyship, I have had 2 different experiences, which it makes me cautious when it comes to creating allies within this space. So in the first experience, I find that non-BAME get uncomfortable when they're not a majority in a space. And that has led to me being extremely empathetic and spending emotional energy ensuring that non-BAME people are comfortable, especially when I realize that I haven't fully cloaked. So I've said a little Trinidadian something, and we have some comments that should not be said. So I said something, and then I go home and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope there's not a student complaints about me after this situation. And don't get me wrong, we students and I have had honest conversations about it, and she's tried to explain to me that it's just that when we truly get into the meat of decolonisation, she then feels guilty about the actions of her ancestors. But for some reason, I still feel like if I need to make that better, and that is one of the things where allyship, I get it, but it's something that I have to cautiously tread. The second one is when we get comments that because we are focused on decolonisation, which naturally draws in BAME participants or BAME students, we are discriminating against non-BAME individuals. We've never not invited them to the conversation, but it's an argument or a situation that I'm currently dealing with. And it's not something I've ever overtly said that non-BAME are not invited, but it's something that, because BAME is a majority in a space, you will have that type of response from certain people. So I understand and fully agree that allyship is something that we need to work on, but we have to figure out ways of dealing with those types of attitudes, because that is emotionally draining as well. It makes you then not want to invite allies to the table.
Oh, the only thing I was going to add is, and I think I've definitely spoken to you about this before, is a lot of it is about navigating guilt. And I think when you come from a place of privilege, and I think I'll say in some ways I do, because I'm mixed race, I'm half white, half Caribbean, half English, half Caribbean more specifically. And so there is an element of guilt even in that dynamic that I know I hold. And so sometimes when I come into these conversations, I have to check that guilt first to make sure I'm not doing anything protective of myself and my identity. And I think that's another thing that I can imagine that coming into these conversations as a white person is something you have to think about first, because hopefully there is a level of guilt there. I definitely have it from half side. And, you don't want to become the person that's putting someone else in a position where they feel like they have to make you feel better, because that's not the point. So I think maybe acknowledging, navigating that guilt before entering those conversations, and also if you start to feel it coming out, maybe taking a step back. So.
I just wanted to make a note on white allyship and our experience through YARC. It's been really difficult to try and lean into working with white allies, because, as has been discussed, it can be really exhausting, and oftentimes, and we have the luxury of being able to, it's not a luxury, but we create global majority only spaces, because they're where you can decloak, unmask. I think what we've done, we've got an ally in the space, Melissa, who's just started working with us, is contracting, where we've been able to really frankly say, hey, okay, let's work together, but what are you going to do when we tell you you're taking up too much space? Because we need to be able to tell you that when it's right. And she was like, yeah, good. Let's work on like a dialogue that works for all of us. And I think the presumption that that's going to come up is really important. Please go to those spaces and take the labour off of your colleagues and other students of colour, but please don't take up their space. And I think where it's laborious is where they're doing loads of admin or taking up more time to congregate people. And I think that asking, without centering yourself, hey, can I just help you with some of that administrative tasks? Do you need somebody to write up your notes? What's something that I could do that's kind of like maybe hands off that keeps your space safe? I think white allyship can be amazing and it's necessary, and it's just a bit difficult to navigate, and maybe bringing white allies, whether it's into your spaces like contracting, is a really nice way to start.
I'm really sorry, but because of time, the time that we need but we don't have, I'm going to have to take that limited hierarchy of the power that I have as a host to draw our panel discussion to an end here. But there are a few questions coming through online that we are not able to answer with the time that we don't have. So I want to just read them out, so we are all aware that these are being brought up. So one question is, the talk about decolonisation and abolition. Is that how you say that word? Abolition. Do you think they are inherently political? Yes. I'm whispering to the microphone. And also, more of a comment rather than a question. So creating safe space, but safety is so different for every individual, and in consultation with a number of communities, we found using the term safer space feel more realistic and authentic for people. And I think there's a lot of discussion about how we frame the ideas, how we talk about these. And another one, quite a long one, but to really condense, the question is, how can we navigate being self-aware in terms of approaching things with a decolonising mindset? Okay. So these comments, I think if we can save them, and I'll put them onto the Padlet, and we can continue this conversation. Okay. So can we have a round of applause for everyone at the front today? Thank you so much. I am very, very sorry I have to rush things through. I really apologize for the lack of time that we have today. And funnily enough, when we were creating the event, we felt 2 hours sounds like a long time. But it really just not enough for us to really discuss everything that we try to cover today. And we really hope we'll find a way to continue this conversation. And that is pretty much the aim of what I and us try to do, is to use this as a way of starting a conversation and to continue that. So now I would like to invite Mel to come and give us a bit of reflection and thoughts about this event. And I've done this intentionally because I would hate for someone in a more senior managerial kind of position to do the closing remark. So no pressure, Mel.
How long have I got?
How long?
It's like 5 minutes.
Yeah?
Yeah? It's
So
go a little bit over. Or is the room booked after this? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try and squish a 10-minute speech-ish into 5 minutes, but if I have to miss anything out, what I'll do is pop it on that Padlet so you can read through it, or you can email me if you want to chat. But yeah, thank you very much for asking me to close today's session. I wanted to start off by just sharing my gratitude to Kai for organising this space, and also those who've spoke before me. It's been a pleasure to meet some of you briefly, and I've indirectly or directly worked with people like York, Jess, Kai, and others throughout the year. So yeah, it's just been lovely to share this space with you all. So my name is Mel, or Melissa. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a second-year PhD student in the politics department and the co-founder and current co-lead of the anti-racism working group based here at York. My research specifically looks at the coloniality of nationality and immigration regimes, specifically the impact of this on Windrush descendants of Jamaican heritage, which I am, on both their legal and existential sense of belonging. I'm an activist, and I'm guided by anti, post and decolonial and black feminist thought. And yeah, that's just a little bit about me before I start. So, as I'm closing today's session, I thought it might be quite useful to reflect on 5 key points that I consider important for decolonial scholar activists and that guide my work and will hopefully help some of you. But before I get into it, it is important to note that research and knowledge production are never a solo endeavour. Although I'm conducting this talk independently, my understandings of decoloniality and approaches to this work have been developed collectively with those that I work with, students that I teach, scholars whose works I've read and listened to, research participants, artists, friends, fellow activists, and the knowledge of my elders and of course my ancestors. I'm incredibly grateful for their teachings and think that it's important to highlight the collective nature of learning and knowledge production before I begin. So let's start. So the first point is to disrupt the co-option and sanitisation of decolonial objectives, which some people have already mentioned today. So those who wish to engage in decolonial work must be very wary of its co-option and sanitisation, which often dilute its radical and liberatory goals. Myself and those who work alongside me are concerned about the misinterpretations of this work in academic institutions, which can lead to the sanitisation of these radical objectives, stifle long overdue and effective change, facilitate complicity and prevent critical reflection on the harms that we produce and reproduce in our elite Western institutions, such as this, and harm decolonial movements. For example, it's important for us to remember that this work is distinct, though related to diversification, equality and inclusion work, and it's also important to be clear about this distinction when we work, for example, to decolonise the curriculum and institutions such as Western universities. So the issues are, you can't EDI your way out of colonial mentalities, hierarchies and structures in an institution, and although creating a more equitable, diverse and inclusive university is crucially important, this work often leaves the colonial structures and power relations intact, which will further produce harm, naturalise the status quo and marginalise students and staff from excluded backgrounds. I'm going to leave that point there. If you want to hear more about it, I'll add it to the Padlet. The second is decolonial research practice. So as a social scientist who doesn't sit comfortably really with any discipline, my reflections on this for the most part will be to cover social science research. So apologies for other colleagues for my notable blind spots here. So as decolonial scholars, we must critique and disrupt epistemic injustice by drawing on approaches to research that centralise, marginalise and indigenous modes of knowing and methods of dissemination, i.e. arts-based methods and participatory research. We've already heard today about the importance of grassroots work, which really just sit at the heart of this, and the incredible work that York and others are doing. But it's not only important for us to basically engage in this work and to join networks such as this, but it's also important for us to meaningfully co-produce with these people when we're conducting research, not just sort of a tick box exercise to make ourselves feel better about the work that we're doing. So to sort of preserve time, I'm just going to read out some bullet points that I think are important reflections when it comes to co-producing. So thinking about, am I maintaining unequal power imbalances in my project? And how can I meaningfully engage with the organisations and community members to disrupt this? What steps am I taking to ensure that this work isn't extractive? Am I centering an ethics of care approach and researching with the community rather than on them? How might this research support the existing work that's going on? Is it useful to them? Is my method of research dissemination accessible to both the community of interest and other community members? Can they read the work that you're producing about them whilst using their knowledge through interviews or support? Yeah. Thirdly, engage in critical reflexivity, which has already been touched upon quite a lot today. So we must engage in constant critical reflexivity, that is to constantly reflect on our positionality, our identity, our proximity to the group of interest, our activism, our roles, for example, and the impact of this not only on the research process, teaching and activism, but also on power imbalances. I certainly don't consider myself as an expert in decolonial practice and approaches to research, teaching and activism, but my work is guided by these principles, and in order to ensure this, I frequently reflect on, am I the right person to be conducting this research? What's my positionality, and how might this further reinforce unequal power imbalances? Is this leading to extractive research? And am I the right person to even be doing this right now? Coming from a mixed heritage background doesn't absolve me from being complicit in colonial power imbalances and upholding those structures. Second to last point is communities of dissent and radical friendships. So meaningful decolonial work can't be done independently or in silos, and working with others is crucial for a great number of reasons. For me, the importance of working with others allows us to create networks and communities of dissent where we can show the load of some of the physical, mental and emotional labour that others have already touched on today. We can share ideas and strategies. We can support one another, particularly those who continue to be harmed by contemporary colonial structures, philosophies and practices through bordering, white supremacy, heteronormativity and othering, for example. Another important factor that I learned from colleagues Juliana Mensah and Patricia Hamilton in the English and Sociology departments is radical friendship. Grounded in black feminist thought, radical friendship prioritises care, reflection and solidarity. And it has been absolutely essential for me in this work, as I'm surrounded by close and critical friends who I organise with, offload and seek guidance from. They listen to me, I listen to them, and we support each other through this. We prevent one another from shouldering the blame of the continued injustices in our institutions and wider society, and use our relative privilege to advocate on behalf of the other in instances where they are most at risk of harm and dispel disillusionment. In comparison to the mammoth and debatably unachievable task of decolonising the university and disrupting coloniality in wider society, a coffee and a chat might appear to be futile, passive or even self-indulgent. but without it, I would have burnt out and quit this work a really long time ago. It's made me and those close to me the scholar activists that we are today, and will continue to enrich and nourish us going forwards. And lastly, I'm going to end on what I feel is the most important point: self-care. Many of those who engage in intersectional decolonial work are aware that this work comes at risk to our mental health, freedom, and particularly in recent times, immigration status. Putting your head above the parapet and demanding radical change does not come without consequences in spaces where others benefit from those structural inequalities and the continued legacies of colonialism. In particular, I encourage those of us with ancestral histories of colonial subjugation, dispossession and oppression who continue to be harmed by this to take care of yourself and rest. This work is important, but it requires a lot of physical and emotional energy and negative repercussions, as many of us are witnessing recently. I've been horrified to witness fellow anti-colonial activists and scholars from racialised backgrounds be targeted by national newspapers, the university, the police and others for speaking out against colonialism and genocide. For many of us, sitting out is just not an option, and I would never ever advocate for this. But I do want to highlight the importance of self-care, rest and finding space to find joy. So I'll end on this quote by Audre Lorde, which I encourage you to keep at the forefront of your mind. Caring for myself is not self-indulgent, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Thank you.
I am so grateful. So, just finally, I feel like it's a bit cheesy to say reflect, take action, change, but I think that we are in that crucial moment. A lot of what I've heard recently is, well, we've done decolonising work, but it is a constant process. I feel like we are only just beginning it. So let's not let the institutions, systems, powers tell us we've already done it. Okay, the pivotal moment has passed. No, we must continue this work. So if you have any feedback, if you want to continue this conversation, which I feel like there is a strong desire to do so, to talk to each other, my email is here, kaitao, with my old name, evangeline.tao@york.ac.uk, got anti-racist-collective@gmail.com, that's Yark's email. And if you would like to join the Staff Race Equality Forum, which is 5 o'clock here, please email equality@york.ac.uk, and also the Decolonising and Diversifying the Curriculum group. One colleague actually asked online, do we have any examples of diversifying the curriculum? Of course we do. We have loads of them. Okay, we just need to seek them out. Thank you all very much, and also a special thanks to Steve, who's been supporting us with the technology. We're not being able to do it. Thank you all for sparing your time today. I know time is precious in this capitalist society, but you being here means a lot. And for everyone who had really volunteered their time to come and speak to us, thank you all very much, and thank you for joining us.